Okay, we're continuing with quotes in alphabetical order. We're doing Stephen Krashen, so with letter K here. He is an American teacher of second languages and a linguist, and he came up with some good ways to help improve teaching of a second language. His most famous concept is something called comprehensible input. The student needs input that's just a little bit ahead of where they're at, so K plus 1, known plus just a little bit more. And he thinks the most valuable thing you can do for learning a second language is free voluntary reading in the second language. I know when I was studying second languages, my favorite thing was read bilingual fairy tales. They're just real pleasant. They've got the pictures. You know the story already. The vocabulary is real high yield about families and friends and stuff you would talk about anyways. He made the interesting observation that the vocabulary in fiction is much more relevant to a regular person than is the vocabulary in nonfiction. So nonfiction might be helpful in your own field. If you're a chemist, read about chemistry, but for most other people, reading about reading fiction is better, more relevant. Okay. You know, in a perfect world, you would have somebody to talk to all the time, but most of us don't have somebody to talk to in that second language. If you do, that makes it a lot easier. Krashen developed the natural order hypothesis, meaning that grammar is learned as part of just trying to read and communicate, just like in L1. Your first language, you learn the grammar just as you go along. It's really kind of a waste of time to study it specifically other than to answer individual questions. And that's why regular schools, high schools, colleges are so stupid in language, especially the high schools, because they teach you on a grammar-based approach, but that's irrelevant. No one learns a language from a grammar-based approach. I've known people who majored in Spanish in college with all this grammar-based approach stuff, and they still can't speak it, which is totally stupid. My mother was from Puerto Rico, so I was interested in Spanish. I didn't learn it as a little kid, but I did talk with her off and on, and I got where I could read Da Vinci Code in Spanish and listen to all the audio CDs, but I still can't converse like a fluent person. But I can converse. As long as a person, is like wants to help me and they go reasonably slow. If they go super fast, I have a hard time. Like I can understand sometimes on the radio, but not always. Krashen also talked about an effective filter, saying that we learn better in a low-stress environment. Yeah, when you're stressed out, it's hard to learn something other than what you're afraid of at the moment. Like enjoying a book rather than an annoying L2 grammar test. Okay, that's the worst. Writing ability comes from reading ability. You got to have some goal in the language, whatever it is. It could be a goal to read a big novel. It could be a goal to have somebody to talk to work in that field, to work as a translator in a hospital. But you need some type of goal. Writing ability comes from reading ability. When you improve your reading, you'll improve your writing. When a learner is fully engaged in studying something that's interesting and moderately challenging, they are in a pleasant, efficient mode called flow. They just enjoy it, like they lose track of time. It's like being on an intellectual scavenger hunt. And I've seen other polyglots who would say the same thing. They would just read for pleasure and gradually pick up the vocabulary from the reading. And again, comprehensible input, sort of like Goldilocks happy medium. Challenging enough to make it interesting, but not so difficult that you're overwhelmed. Okay, and you have to enjoy it. Okay, so here's some more Krashen quotes. Several correlational studies looking at the effect of a variety of actors on L2 proficiency have shown the importance of extensive reading. Reading outside the class was the most significant predictor of oral communication ability. Reading for pleasure was most strongly related to proficiency. Another quote here, this one's by Simonton. He said, "Good thinkers, however they are defined, read a great deal, and they have read a great deal. Omnivorous reading in childhood and adolescence correlates positively with ultimate adult success." Yeah, most super smart people, they go through a prolonged phase where they're kind of lonely and they just read and study a lot. High school students who are considered creative read a lot more than average students. The more creative students read over 50 books a year. Smart people use reading and writing to solve problems. Lighter reading, easy books, prepare a person to later on read bigger books, heavier books. Frequency of less common words in ordinary conversation was much lower than even in the lightest reading. Yeah, there's more vocabulary in a book by far than in conversation. About 95% of the words used in conversation and television are from the most frequent 5,000. Yeah, TV is made for stupid people, so it's going to be dumbed down. Printed text include far more uncommon words. So you build up lexical knowledge, vocabulary. Okay, Krashen, I think this is more of Krashen here. He said, I propose the pleasure hypothesis. Pedagogical activities that promote language acquisition are the ones that are enjoyable, and those that do not promote language acquisition are not enjoyable. Free voluntary reading was the most powerful tool we have in language education. In fact, it appears too good to be true. It is an effective way of increasing literacy and language development with strong impact on reading comprehension, vocabulary, grammar, and writing. It is also very pleasant. In fact, it is more than pleasant. It is enjoyable, extremely enjoyable. And free reading may also be an important part of the solution to two related problems: making the transition from the elementary level to authentic language use, and from conversational language ability to academic language ability. Free voluntary reading works. I propose it is because it is a form of comprehensible input delivered in a low anxiety situation. Okay, so that's Stephen Krashen, the great L2 acquisition researcher. All right, so the next person here is Karl Kraus. He lived from 1874 to 1936. I like his quote about psychoanalysis. He said, psychoanalysis is the mental illness which it regards itself as a therapy. Yeah, it's craziness. It makes the person unhappy. Okay, now we're going to talk about Peter Kreeft. Peter Kreeft is a PhD philosopher who's really sort of he was a convert to Catholicism, and he talks a lot about religion. And basically, he's a nice guy. He's sort of pleasant. I think he's kind of a lightweight, but he's pleasant. I think his heart's in the right place. So he's got a couple good quotes. He says, control language and you control thought. Control thought and you control action. Control action and you control the world. If you do not annoy anyone, then you're not a philosopher. So control language means that a lot of times they'll try to take something that has a negative connotation in the public's mind and associate it with something that has a positive connotation, like LGBTQ in the public mind. When I was a kid, it was sort of a negative connotation, but then they associate it with a rainbow, and everybody likes rainbows, so they say, oh, it's like a rainbow. But anal sex and a rainbow aren't the same thing. Okay, that's that's joining it intentionally to make it look good. And then they'll take something that they don't like and that usually has a positive reputation in the public's mind, like masculinity, and then they'll try to associate that with something bad to make the public not like it. Okay, it's all part of weakening the public. All right, the next one is academics is mostly the bland leading the bland. The church has never changed its orthodoxy. The world just keeps changing its heresies. Atheism cheapens everything it touches. Look at the results of communism, the most powerful form of atheism on earth. Gray is the devil's favorite color. So you can get that from, look at Soviet Russia. Take a look at the apartment buildings that people live in. They just look like a whole bunch of animal cages. And you've seen, the modern architecture, so-called architecture in the Western world. It's always crappy buildings, again, that look like animal cages with a statue of a turd in front of it, as Tom Wolfe likes to say, the great American writer. Okay, here's more Peter Kreeft. Kindness, mere kindness, cannot tolerate suffering, but love can. The meaning of, you're kind to somebody to be nice, to be polite. It doesn't mean you really like them or you care about them. When you love somebody, you love them, okay? It's a lot stronger. The meaning of life is to become a saint. Those are big words. And that's also why, Christianity, psychology is better than psychology. You talk to psychologists, they can't even tell you what it means to live a good life, what's a good book, what's good art. How should I live? Who's a good person? Who's a good role model? Who's the definition of a good life? Whereas in Christianity, it's obvious. The saints, Jesus Christ, Mary, they're heroically good people. Try to be like them to the extent you can. Okay, Kreeft. We are artists because God is. Created in the image of God, therefore we too can be creators. All human beings have a right to life. Our unborn children are human beings, so they have a right to life. Okay, that sounds good. So anyways, that's it for today. I hope you found those quotes helpful.